All right. Let's see. Okay. So, hi everyone. Today, we're going to be going over chapter 11 out of the trainer manual and covering cardiorespiratory training, programming, and progressions. So we'll try to keep it orderly and tidy as usual. So I'm going to go through and we're going to chat about it just a little bit. So firstly, we're going to talk about muscular system adaptations. As you know, we have two muscle fiber types, type 1 and then type 2 A and B. So as you could probably guess, when you're doing more low intensity endurance exercise, you're going to be stimulating the type 1 muscle fibers. And when you're doing more high intensity exercise, you're going to be stimulating type 2 muscle fibers, primarily due to force production. But you'll see here on the PowerPoint that we see an increase in the number of mitochondria, powerhouse of the cell. We have an increase in capillarization for the low intensity exercise. And then during high intensity exercise, we'll have an increase in anaerobic enzymes and potential increase in muscle fiber size, which allows for increased contraction of the muscle. Moving forward, we'll see cardiovascular system adaptations. We've touched on this before. You'll see that stroke volume increases and that the chambers of the heart, so that all these chambers will get bigger, be able to have more blood volume, and it'll be able to contract harder and push more out at a faster rate. Respiratory system adaptations, you'll be able to consume a greater volume of air, and at the same time, the alveoli, the little fluid-filled sacs in the lungs themselves, will get better at diffusing oxygen into the bloodstream. So you'll have a better, more of a supply. Yeah. So we'll keep going. We have steady state versus interval training. So steady state would be your heart rate stays at a same level. At least you want it to stay at the same level over the course of time. And then for interval training, it'll look more like an undulation. So that would be like high intensity interval training. You're doing like 30 seconds on, a minute off, or Tabata would be like 10 seconds on, 20, or 20 seconds on, 10 seconds off. Just like really any kind of fitness move, you want to have a good warm up. Then you get into the meat of your workout, the conditioning phase, and then you'll have a cool down phase. So during the warm up phase, this is going to fluctuate based on the individual, but it should last about 5 to 10 minutes. And you want to be doing the moves that you're going to be doing in the workout. So like if you're about to go for a run, I probably wouldn't make much sense to warm up your chest and back. So keeping that in mind when we're doing our warm-ups. Conditioning phase, we're going to get into the FIT principle. I think we've chatted about this maybe before, but essentially you just want to keep these elements in mind: frequency, duration, intensity, modality, and the client's goals and fitness level. Cool down, this is where you're going to add your stretches in and make sure that inflammation doesn't happen at the joints or inside the muscle itself. Also going to improve flexibility, range of motion, which is going to help just with the body moving better and with preventing injury. All right, So general guidelines for cardiorespiratory exercise, as ACE sees it, this is probably going to be an important piece to learn here. But from anyone from 18 to 64 years old, the recommendation is 150 minutes per week of moderate intensity aerobic physical activity, or 75 minutes per week of vigorous intensity aerobic physical activity. So definitely the 150 and the 75, 150 minutes of moderate and then 75 minutes of vigorous. That's something that is probably going to be touched on the exam. And then going to the younger age group, 6 to 17, this is also going to be something that's important to know for the exam. Perform at least 60 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity every day. And you're going to want to do that. You're going to want to do the vigorous activity a minimum of 3 times a week. And also we want to do those muscle strengthening and bone strengthening activities, which are basically what kids normally do, you know, running, jumping, hanging on stuff, just to make sure that their bones grow and that they become strong over the course of time. All right, FIT principle, as I promised. This is a way for you to program, and this can be to program for resistance training or cardiovascular training. Excuse me. So frequency, if you were, like, let's say, for example, you wanted to make a cardio program for someone, you would say, okay, frequency, I want you to do it 2 times a week. Intensity, we'll get into some of the different modalities of intensity, but let's use RPE, rating of perceived exertion. You'd say, I want you to be at a 6 to 7 out of 10 RPE. So that's like moderate, not too crazy, probably in between ventilatory threshold 1 and 2. So you can talk, but you're only able to get out like 1 to 2 words, small phrases at a time. Time or duration. So let's say we want you to do it for 20 minutes, and then type or modality. This could be walking at an incline on a treadmill. It could be walking outside. It could be riding your bike. It could be swimming. It could be anything. And then they added an E at the end for enjoyable. This is key because a lot of people don't really like cardio. That's just facts. So don't necessarily be a dictator about it. Ask them what they like. Maybe try to show them things that they might like. Test the water and have them do something that they enjoy so that they will adhere to it a little bit better. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Hold on 1 second, I'm gonna switch it around. Share. All right, here we go. Hopefully this all looks good. So we move to lesson 11.2. And we're still talking about cardiorespiratory exercise, programming, and progressions. Methods for monitoring intensity. All right, these are all going to be pretty key and useful, whether they're going to be tested on or not when you're working with your clients. Some of these you won't necessarily have the tools to do, but it's also good to know in case it ever pops up. So we have heart rate, and we'll talk about max heart rate and heart rate reserve today. And then we have RPE, which we discussed when we were doing the FIT principle, ratings of perceived exertion. We have metabolic equivalents, METs, caloric expenditure, talk test with ventilatory thresholds, and then we have blood lactate and second ventilatory threshold. So we're going to chat about these. So we have the first one, which is heart rate, and we're going to go over the variables that impact the max heart rate a little bit. And some of them are mainly common sense, but you'll be able to see a little bit later how that works out. But we have genetics, we have exercise modality, we have medications, body size, altitude, and age. All right, so formulas again. We've talked about a lot of formulas. This is definitely one that you're going to want to know. So we have two ways that we are able to determine max heart rate. That's the age formula, which is 220 minus your age, which is a lot easier and it's simple to remember because it's always going to be 220 minus your age. So me, for example, I'm 23, so I would do 220 minus 23. So my max heart rate would be 197, I think. Yeah. So that formula itself isn't quite as accurate as this next one that I'm about to give you, which is going to be 206.9 minus, in parentheses, 0.67 times your age. Apparently that one has a greater accuracy, a smaller standard deviation. So we want to take that into account, especially like, let's say we're working with someone who is maybe a little bit older or who might be taking a medication that would alter their heart rate activity. So definitely know those for the test for sure. Okay, we have the Carbonin method. This is also another important formula that you should know for the test. We have heart rate reserve. That's what this is. That's what Carbonin, that's why he created this, was to be able to determine heart rate reserve. So think of heart rate reserve as, right now I'm resting. So my reserved heart rate is going to be how much farther my heart rate can go up from my resting rate. So it incorporates resting heart rate, the space that you can go in between resting heart rate and your max heart rate. And the formula is going to look like, so we have heart rate reserve times intensity plus resting heart rate. So in order to do this, you're going to need to know the person's resting heart rate and their max heart rate, and then the percentage. Let's say you want them to work at 70% of their heart rate reserve, then that's going to all incorporate into this formula. So for example, let's say I'm doing this on myself. I'll just put it right here. But let's say my resting heart rate is 80 beats per minute and my max heart rate is 197, meaning that my heart rate reserve is going to be 197 minus 80, which is 117. Resting heart rate equals 80. 197 minus 80 equals 117. So that's my heart rate reserve. So then we have, oops. So if I wanted to calculate a percentage of that heart rate reserve, then I would just multiply the percentage by that number. So let's say I wanted to work at 50% of my heart rate reserve, then I would do 117 times 0.5 and get whatever that is. So it'd be like 57. Yeah, 56, 58. Let's do 58. So then it would be 58 plus the resting heart rate, which is 80. So then I know that if I want to work at 50% of my heart rate reserve, I will need to be physically, when I'm working out and exercising, I will need to be at 138 beats per minute. Beats per minute. Okay. Recap. We have our max heart rate, we have our resting heart rate. In order to figure out our heart rate reserve, we need to subtract the resting heart rate from our max heart rate. And then from there, you'll multiply the training percentage that you want to work at. So say 50, it can be 50, 60, 70, 80, all the way up to 100. You multiply that by by the heart rate reserve, and then you'll get your desired target heart rate. All right, moving on. RPE. This one is really convenient, and it allows people to it helps people understand how hard they're working in a particular point in time. So there are different scales. As you can see over here, we have the 6 to 20, and then we have the 0 to 10. So a lot of times for me, unless I'm with someone that's a little bit more experienced, I'll just use the 0 to 10 scale because it's a little bit easier. There's less variability because the one over here, the 6 to 21, is just a lot of numbers, and maybe people that haven't worked out too much might not be able to know the difference between very, very light, fairly light, and somewhat hard. So to start out, it's nice to stick around in the 0 to 10. But then for more advanced people, it'd be better to use the 6 to 20. Okay, metabolic equivalence. So oftentimes on like cardio equipment, you'll see METs, and this is directly related to that. So it is a metabolic equivalent is basically the volume of oxygen consumed at rest. So for any given individual, approximately 3.5 milliliters per kilogram per minute are consumed at rest. That's an average. So then that's one MET. So one MET is 3.5 milliliters per kilogram per minute. And that is referencing someone at rest. So you know that, like right here, if you're working at 5 METs, that you're working 5 times harder than resting. And then here we have some classifications. Light workout would be less than 3 METs, moderate would be 3 to 6 METs, and vigorous would be greater than 6 METs. But it's all going to be based on the person's max VO2, which sometimes you won't know, but there are classification charts that you can utilize based on some of the testing that you'll be doing, like the 3-minute step test, the Rockport 1.5, or the Rockport walk test, and the 1.5 mile run. Moving on, caloric expenditure. So we talked about oxygen consumed. Now we're going to chat about the caloric expenditure that is a result of the consumption of oxygen. And we'll see that a value of 5 calories per liter of oxygen consumed is sufficiently accurate for the purposes of not having like the equipment, like this whole setup here. So we'll have caloric expenditure, and here you'll see calculated in terms of gross or absolute VO2 during an activity. So there's a good example right here of what that'll look like. Remember we talked about relative VO2 and how it factors in another unit. So normally when you're talking about VO2 max, you'll be talking about liters per minute. But when you're talking about relative VO2 max, you want to incorporate body weight in there as well, just so that it is more of an average. So when you're doing the gross or absolute VO2, essentially what you're going to do is just multiply like in this case, you'd multiply the 40 times the body weight, and then you'll get the absolute or gross VO2. Talk test, we've talked about this. We have ventilatory threshold 1 and ventilatory threshold 2. Before ventilatory threshold 1, you can talk normally. In between ventilatory threshold 1 and 2, you can only get out 1 or 2 words, maybe a phrase, and then up above ventilatory threshold 2, you can't really talk that much at all. All right, so we have blood lactate and VT2. So we talked about anaerobic threshold, which, if you remember, is when the body can no longer utilize oxygen for energy and needs to use anaerobic means to get its energy. So those are very intense exercises. So essentially, we chatted about this when we talked about anaerobic threshold, but anaerobic threshold, VT2, and lactate threshold are all very similar, very close in relation. And we see that at VT2, oftentimes you're getting close or you have reached your lactate threshold. All right, we have the zones. We've also gone over this, but we have zone 1, zone 2, and zone 3, and they're all in relation to where the ventilatory thresholds are. And again, we're talking about the talk test. So we'll move on from that. All right, duration. Okay, so duration is really going to be dependent on the client themselves and their exercise history and what they feel comfortable doing. So as a personal trainer, it's your responsibility to be able to monitor the situation, understand when the client is reaching the brink of exhaustion and being able to pull back the reins. It's kind of like a trial and error thing, because when you first meet someone, you might not know. So like if you have that first meeting and it's way too difficult, then you know you need to pull back on the reins a little bit, maybe incorporate some more rest period or decrease the intensity in other ways, like let's say less speed, less incline, less resistance. Okay, yeah, so we have progression in the cardiorespiratory training, and this is also subjective as well. So we don't want to, like we have someone that comes in off the street and they want to run a marathon, but they've never ran before. If we have them run 1 mile the first day and that seems to go well, we're not going to bump them up to 5 miles the next time we meet. It has to be a slower progression than that. But also it depends on the person's body as well. A lot of people's bodies react differently to different forms of cardio exercise. So keeping that in mind, keeping program goals in mind, and keeping the SAID principle in mind, which is the specific adaptations to imposed demands, which is basically if someone is training for cardiorespiratory endurance, you're not going to have them do 1 rep max squats. You want to program something more tailored to their goals. All right, let's move on to the last one here. So hold on 1 sec, let me get this all squared away here. All right, let's see if that works. Okay, so I think we're still recording, and we're going to get into the last chapter right now, 11.3. All right, So modes of cardiorespiratory exercise, I'm just going to read them verbatim for right now. We have any type of activity that involves a large amount of muscle, can be performed in a rhythmic fashion, sustained for more than a few minutes. Sustained moderate intensity exercise, i.e. more than 10 to 15 minutes, is the key to cardiorespiratory exercise training. All right, so we have your normal equipment that you can get on and utilize: treadmills, cycle ergometers, which are just bikes, elliptical machines, rowing machines, arm ergometers, which are just the ones that you go like that with. We have group exercise, circuit training. So this can look like a lot of different things, but oftentimes it's 8 exercises all packed together. So this would be like basically a group fitness class. The majority of them are all circuit-based training moves, but in a nutshell, and oftentimes it's stations as well. So in a nutshell, you just do all of them. Let's say you have 8 exercises, you do all 8 exercises, and then you wouldn't rest until after all of those 8 exercises. Outdoor exercises: running, canoeing, climbing, hiking, cycling, walking, lots of different stuff. Could even be swimming. Seasonal exercise: skiing, snowshoeing, ice skating, stand-up paddleboarding. There's a lot of different options. Water-based: mind and body exercises, Pilates, yoga, Tai Chi. Lifestyle exercise or activities of daily living: working in the yard, mowing the lawn, taking the stairs, parking in the farthest parking lot, parking space away from the grocery store, lots of different things. Okay. We have training phases that are related to the zones, that are related to the ventilatory thresholds. So know the zones, know the ventilatory thresholds, know the talk test. All those are, you see them, they keep coming up all the time in these lectures, so very likely that they'll be on the exam. So we have aerobic training. So just in the name itself, you know that aerobic, it's utilizing oxygen. It's probably going to primarily work type 1 muscle fibers unless you're going to fatigue. Very good place to start with sedentary individuals or individuals that don't have a lot of experience because their body is not used to the strain of more intense workout strategies, I guess you'd say. So yeah, we'll move forward. We have aerobic efficiency training. The focus here is to increase duration and introduce intervals to improve aerobic efficiency, fitness, and health. You're using a heart rate and ventilatory threshold test in order to be able to check the efficiency of someone when they're working out. And it's still in all the phases. So we're talking about the progression of phases, when to get to phase or to like, let's say zone 2, or when to progress to zone 3. So for the most part, you want to make it as gradual as possible until someone is very comfortable with a move. Then you can be more pushy about intensity. So we have anaerobic endurance, where you're administering, okay, let's do the focus first. To help clients with endurance performance goals and or who are performing 7+ hours of cardiorespiratory exercise per week. So you're doing a VT threshold test to determine heart rate at VT2. The majority of cardiorespiratory training time spent in zone 1. Interval and higher intensity sessions are focused in zone 2 and zone 3. Progressively increased training volume, less than 10% per week until the total weekly volume reaches a maximum of 3 times the anticipated duration of the target event. Anaerobic power training. Focus to improve phosphagen energy pathways and buffer large accumulations of blood lactate. A similar distribution to phase 3 training times. Zone 1, 70 to 80% of training time. Zone 2, less than 10% of training time. Zone 3, 10 to 20% of training time. Zone 3 training includes very intense anaerobic power intervals. Clients generally only work in phase 4 during specific training cycles prior to competition. So we're talking about youth here, and 2 primary considerations: preventing early overspecialization, protecting against orthopedic trauma from training too much. So it's asking a question, what are the guidelines for children prior to age of puberty? And we know that they're supposed to engage in 60 minutes of activity per day and have that high intensity activity at least three times per week, as we saw in the first set of slides. So we're almost done. Keep moving forward here. Older adults. So the body is very elastic. With age, the elastic tissues begin to harden. So increased warm up and cool down focuses on mobility and stretching are going to be key in preventing injury and protecting yourselves as well. Okay, so that's going to do it. I hope everyone's doing well. Thank you all. And we'll see you later on. All right, bye.